So I'll just introduce the process today and talk a little bit about what we're here to talk about and where we've come from even just recently, and then I'll hand it over to Jeff, who will lead the discussion through to the end. At the end, if I could ask council to save questions until the end, which will be more of a roll up our sleeves discussion, so about the values of council and the values of the public when it comes to shaping our mobility future. That's what tonight's discussion is meant to kick off in community as well, as that same level of discourse in community about what are the things most important and valuable to us that we have to consider as we move forward in the planning of our very limited right of way and our limited funds. So how do we make the wisest decisions moving ahead? There will also be an opportunity for us to revisit you as a part two of this particular workshop, where we'll be able to take all of the things that we hear and download from today and tonight and some of the engagement process that happens, and do a little bit more of a deep dive into our value system so that we can lock that in to what the comments are coming from community into our sustainable mobility strategy itself, which will come, and I'll show you a timeline of how that's shaping. So, setting the stage, why are we here and why are we doing this work now? Council that have been at the table for a while would remember about 18 months ago, talking a lot about the compromises and the trade-offs when it comes to introducing protected bike facilities in the downtown. At the same time, we were finishing the Johnson Street Bridge project. At the same time, we were at the beginning and a very steep on-ramp of development boom in the city that we haven't seen since pre-war era. And we were under a lot of pressure, both from the community's perspective as well as from staff, to manage the daily requirements of developing the city and growing the city and changing the city in what is a built-out city, a compact city, and there is no additional right-of-way to go grab. We can't just make new roads. We have to do our best with the space that we have. At the same time, you throw Christmas shopping and some Air Bud type of movie filming all along the same street, and we reached a bit of a critical spot where we said to ourselves, how do we navigate the next several years, understanding that we're in this development rhythm that's very high-paced and intense? How do we navigate the next few years mobility-wise and planning-wise when we're faced with these challenges that are coming, no matter if we want them or not? And that really set us up for looking at our master planning process that we usually have sort of approached our asset groups with and saying, well, we have a parking master plan or strategy. We have a pavement master plan as an asset group. We have sidewalk planning processes. And we have all of these plans, but we didn't have a way to knit them together. We didn't have a way to show how the decisions in one domain affect and influence the outcomes in the other. We didn't have a good story to tell. We didn't have a good set of metrics and data to support our decisions. And in some cases, we don't yet have the tools to make that trade space and elegant decision-making process flourish so that we can make the best decisions and the wisest investment of the taxpayer dollar. So we determined that a more holistic strategy was required to look closely at the different asset groups as well as the different planning elements, with a focus on people and a focus on vitality and a focus on livability, so that we can understand how do we navigate the change that's coming, the change that we're already experiencing, and how do we move forward in the best possible way. So that's what spawned the sustainable mobility strategy. That's what led to the planning, and that's what led to the relationships that we built here and moving forward. So I'm excited that we're here because this is a topic for everybody in community and everybody in the room that is touched differently, commonly, frequently by the choices that we make about mobility. So I will talk just briefly now about what the process is moving forward over the months that are to come. We've been really digging into what is the current problem look like, or what are the current set of issues and challenges that we're experiencing? What is the data that supports what are the patterns of human behavior and mobility behavior that are occurring in our city and our region? And we're looking at right now is moving through into our public inquiry and our engagement to really tease out all of the insights and information from community so that we can understand why we are having the stuff that's happening. And as we move forward with the strategy development and the toolkit generation, we'll be looking at delivering a strategy in the summer period where we have an action plan with a focus on execution. We all understand that failure is a glossy plan that's never been opened that sits on a shelf, and we want actionable, wise and intelligent strategies to move forward so that we can balance all of these forces and all of these challenges into the future and deliver a system of mobility networks, whether that's parking, buses, bikes, road, sidewalks, accessibility, and pedestrian flow in a way that is balanced and reflects our values and allows us to make good decisions. So with that, who are we working with? Nelson Nygaard was founded in 1987 in California by a set of planners and transportation experts that really wanted to put people first. And their portfolio demonstrates a set of world-class expertise and outcomes that's been applied to cities like Washington, D.C., Chicago, San Francisco, and then smaller communities that have a lot in common with Victoria. Universities, towns, states, NACTO transportation standards, which we always talk about, are developed by people like this, supporting the federal governments and the different organizations with the expertise that they need that understand how to make cities work. Jeff is the principal and the director of strategy at Nelson Nygaard, based out of San Francisco, and has a wonderful career which includes authorship of transportation encyclopedic types of books, which means that he is the professor and the guru in the room, and we will lean on him to learn and tease out and take as much value from his experiences as possible. Jennifer has an amazing set of experiences, even closer to Victoria, having worked in the city of Seattle and leading their transportation teams through big transitions and also master planning processes. And Jennifer, now with Nelson, is able to have taken those to different cities around North America and now brings those sets of experiences here. Brendan and Mo, who are in the back, and Lauren, who's not with us today, are part of this team, a very capable team, a very engaged team, and a very fun, upbeat, and positive team to work with. So we're really excited to have them here. I know we can get into much more discussions about those individual projects, which we will try to take to learn the lessons that other cities in North America have learned in the quickest fashion possible, so that we don't repeat those mistakes. And the only way for us as a city to really get access to those lessons is to hire people like this to partner with, so that we can move forward. They already have relationships in the region. They've already been involved with projects, big transformational design projects in Vancouver and around the area. They are known, they are honed, and we are excited to have them here. And on that note, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thanks, Fraser. So as Fraser said, our goal here is to create an actionable plan that helps you make decisions to accommodate change. And the secret for doing that is deep clarity about your values and priorities. So those are going to be really the key themes throughout all of our work on this plan, and actually the hard work that we're going to ask you to do, because that's one of the fundamental responsibilities of being a council member, is you own the city's values. And it's through clarity about values that you can direct staff to allocate the city's limited resources in order to achieve the city's largest goals. It's particularly important in mobility, because in mobility we touch everything. So the starting place for our work is looking at all of your past work and all of your adopted policies that have some relationship to mobility and to accommodating the change that is coming to your community. So just as a couple of examples, we know that climate change and CO2 reduction are big priorities for the city of Victoria. And we also know that from your own analysis that 40% of Victoria's CO2 emissions come from transport, and of that, the vast majority is personal driving by people like us. The only way that you're going to be able to meet your climate resilience goals is through focusing on mobility. So this will be a big part of our work. What does this mean in order to decarbonize transport? We also know that Victoria has limited resources and a lot of existing infrastructure that you need to maintain. How do we make sure that the next set of improvements in mobility infrastructure don't exacerbate some of the structural deficit that you have around maintaining your existing systems? How do we take advantage of changes in transportation technology in order to make mobility and its infrastructure more efficient? This requires some significant economic analysis and asset management analysis in order to make sure that we can help you achieve your own fiscal responsibility goals. We know that a pedestrian is struck by a car every week here in Victoria. And that while the region has a Vision Zero goal, we haven't quite, we don't have an adopted policy yet in Victoria. And so this is one of the sort of fundamental questions that we have about Victoria, is where do you fall on the balance between motorist convenience and pedestrian safety? Every pedestrian or traffic fatality is 100% preventable. We know how to prevent all traffic fatalities through design and management of the street. But we also desire speed. Speed is the enemy of safety. So as council, we're going to have to walk through a process of figuring out to what degree do we want to balance these two fundamental principles, because they're in tension with each other. We also know that there's a desire for additional economic growth, but at the same time dealing with the worsening housing affordability and social equity problems in the city and the region. So looking at the detailed demographic changes, how is the age distribution of Victoria changing? How's the income distribution? What is happening to the bottom quintile of households by income? And how is that impacting travel behavior, not only here within Victoria, but also with your neighbors? This plan is inextricably linked to the cities around you, particularly Saanich, where there is this remarkable partnership, both around who lives where and commutes where, but increasingly having Saanich be a commute destination for Victorians as well. We also know that mobility has a bigger impact on public health outcomes than the medical profession does. Every human body needs 10,000 steps every day, or 10,000 pushes of our wheelchair every day in order to function optimally. And if you expect your citizens to have to drive to the gym and jog on a treadmill in order to be healthy, you're condemning your population to poor health outcomes. How are we designing Victoria in order to optimize the health of everyone? We also know that while you have existing issues that mobility could help solve or problems that mobility could exacerbate, the pace of change is picking up. Change is coming to you whether you want it or not, and only by having clarity about your values will you be able to get ahead of that change and respond in time. You all know about changes in emerging mobility technology. It is fascinating to us that British Columbia is last to the game in so many of these technologies, which gives you the opportunity to learn from the mistakes of other jurisdictions. But that only works if you're clear about what your priorities are. One of the things that's fascinating to me about, for example, autonomous vehicles is they create many advantages, but plenty of disadvantages, which we'll get into later. Autonomous vehicles operate on the public right-of-way. This is public land that you are responsible for managing. So by defining the public good and directing staff to manage the public right-of-way for that public good, we can get the best out of new technologies and avoid some of the dire unintended negative consequences that some of your neighbors have experienced. So that said, there are upsides. Autonomy, Uber, Lyft are bringing us added convenience, but reduced efficiency in the mobility system. Meanwhile, other technologies like bicycle-propelled little UPS trucks are taking advantage of investments in non-motorized infrastructure in order to not just move people, but also move freight. We've seen some downsides of communities having 10,000 dockless bikes or scooters dumped on their streets overnight, but also cities being smart about managing those new technologies in order to reduce the negative outcomes and take advantage of the positive outcomes. We're also starting to see cities take the leadership in managing the entire mobility system, looking at mobility not just as a collection of infrastructure, but as an integrated set of services that allow the most important mobility device to be our phones rather than our cars, and giving people rational choices that make it possible to not only not have to take a car for every trip, but not even have to own a car and still be able to have access to a car on seconds' notice. We know from popular culture as well that there are always unintended negative consequences of new mobility technology. We know the film WALL-E, I think, very accurately reflects some of the unintended public health and social health impacts of ubiquitous, door-to-door, private autonomous mobility. We You want to avoid some of those potential mistakes that we're already seeing in reality in the United States. And instead, point technology towards actually solving for real social problems and upholding the public good, rather than simply letting private operators profit off of the public right of way. Using technology to allow the transportation system to become more efficient, not just more convenient, and to also pursue our social equity and environmental and social goals, as well as private profit. So, the role of this mobility strategy is to start by looking at where you are now. How are things working? What's not working? What's working well? And celebrate the things that you've done extraordinarily well. We've been struggling to find peers for Victoria because there isn't any city of your size in North America that has as much mojo as you do. You've done great. And yet, this is not a time for complacency. So in order to move forward, we're going to be asking your whole population, as well as you, to clearly articulate your values and to identify where your values are in tension with one another, and then to help us establish priorities. What is more important? How do we differentiate wants from needs? And then, from there, start trying to operationalize those values through goals and objectives and clear evaluation performance metrics so that we can link your values to your budget and to your decision making about what projects get funded and which ones do not, and embed that into this plan. So, in order to shape our mobility future, it's necessary that we partner. Victoria can't do this on its own. It is linked to the region and to many mobility service providers, both public and private. They all need to be involved in helping Victoria move forward. That said, you've got an immense amount of control. You own most of the streets. And if you can clearly define what you mean by the public good, we can come up with not only policies, but also projects that move Victoria rapidly forward for demonstrating how excellent you are at upholding the public good and getting the most out of your limited street rights of way. So this is the very beginning of our process. It is very important that we hear from a broad diversity of voices across your community. It's part of what this evening's event is about, is creating a little bit of excitement and new ways of engaging not just the professional meeting attenders. So we're having sort of conventional workshops, but also doing some work in the neighborhoods, both in person and online. We're trying to take very complex topics and distill it into language that normal humans can understand. Very importantly, we will not be asking your community what it wants. We're going to be asking your community what it needs, and to help us make the difficult choices when you can do one thing or another, but not both. Our job is to then distill all that, to reflect what we've heard back to you, and to provide some context for you to make some clear decisions that will allow your community to move forward quickly. One way of doing this very quickly is creating some tools, some decision-making tools that link your values to performance metrics and allow staff to rank projects based upon how well they meet your goals. This can then allow you to weight your different goals and objectives in order to come up with cost-benefit scores for your projects that not only allow you to be confident that you're funding the right things, but also to develop trust with the electorate. That you're doing your job to allocate Victoria's very limited resources in order to uphold the values that they elected you for. So, we're beginning, the very beginning of work, looking through all of your past policy documents to try to take what in some cases is a too long list of values, sometimes that's mixing values and principles, sometimes mixing principles and strategies, to start thinking about what is it that you uniquely care about. Clearly, adaptability and resilience to climate change is a clear one. Clearly, beauty and the unique character of this extraordinary part of the planet, something that we see again and again. There's particular language about economic vibrancy, being able to attract and retain young talent to support the tourism industry, but in a way that's rooted in what's unique and fabulous about Victoria itself. We're reading a lot about inclusiveness in the process, about equity in decision making. We're hearing a lot about individual health and well-being, both physical health and mental health. We're hearing about safety and security, about a strong community and an engaged community, about sustainable ecological systems, all of the systems, all of which touch the transportation system. We're hearing about transparent governance and also about well-maintained and efficient systems. So this is, again, the very beginning of our process, and we're eager to hear from you any questions you may have where we are now, as well as reflecting back on what you've heard so far and what we need to be hearing from you about what is uniquely Victorian about your values. Thank you very much.